The moment the black limousine stopped in front of the church, the laughter at the wedding entrance suddenly disappeared. Hundreds of guests turned toward the polished vehicle as the driver stepped out, walked around the back, and opened the door with quiet respect. Nobody knew who was inside, but the groom knew. His face lost all its color, because the woman stepping out of that limousine was the woman he had once called worthless. His poor ex-wife, whom he had invited to his wedding believing she would arrive embarrassed, broken, and alone, stepped onto the red carpet wearing a simple emerald green dress. And beside her came 3 beautiful little girls, each holding one of her hands or the hand of the woman who had spent years raising them in silence. If you believe people deserve kindness, second chances, and the opportunity to rise above the pain others caused them, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Because this story is not really about money. It is about what happens when someone who was humiliated discovers that her greatest wealth was never money at all. 3 years earlier, Clara Bennett had stood in the same kind of doorway, but there had been no red carpet beneath her feet. There had been no limousine, no elegant guests, and no admiring eyes. There had only been a cardboard box in her arms, rain running down her face, and 3 tiny newborn daughters sleeping against her chest. Her husband, Marcus Bennett, had told her their marriage was over. Marcus had grown up in a modest family in Columbus, Ohio, but after years of working in real estate, he had become increasingly obsessed with success. His first small property investment had turned into several buildings, then an expanding development company, and eventually a fortune large enough to change the way people treated him. As his wealth grew, Marcus began to look at Clara differently. He once loved the way she cooked simple dinners and stayed awake when he worked late. He once loved that she remembered every little detail about him. But success slowly convinced him that he deserved someone more glamorous. Clara was a quiet woman. She wore inexpensive clothes, rarely went to expensive restaurants, and had never cared about designer handbags or luxury vacations. Her greatest dream had simply been to build a peaceful home for their family. Then, during the final year of their marriage, Clara discovered she was pregnant. Not with 1 baby, not with 2. She was carrying triplets. For a short time, Marcus seemed genuinely happy. He bought tiny clothes and talked about the future. But when the pregnancy became difficult and Clara had to stop working, his attitude changed. Medical bills began arriving. Clara needed constant rest. She could barely manage the household. Marcus started spending more time away from home. Then one evening, everything shattered. He came home wearing an expensive suit and smelling of a restaurant Clara had never been able to afford. He placed divorce papers on the kitchen table and told her he could no longer live the life they had built together. Clara stared at the papers while one hand rested protectively over her stomach. What hurt most wasn't the divorce. It was the way Marcus spoke about her. He told her she was holding him back. He said she had become an embarrassment. He complained that people in his business circle had begun asking why his wife never attended expensive events. Clara didn't beg him to stay. She didn't scream. She simply signed the papers with trembling fingers. Several weeks later, the triplets were born prematurely at a hospital in Ohio. Their names were Grace, Hannah, and Sarah. They were so tiny that each baby could almost fit against Clara's chest. Clara spent weeks beside their hospital beds, sleeping in a chair and praying through every frightening night. Marcus visited only twice. When the girls were finally strong enough to go home, Clara had nowhere to go. She rented a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati using the little savings she had left. The rent consumed most of her money. She took whatever work she could find from home, doing bookkeeping, answering customer emails, and later preparing financial documents for small businesses. There were nights when she ate toast for dinner so her daughters could have enough food. There were mornings when she cried quietly in the bathroom because she didn't know how she would pay the electricity bill. But every time she looked at Grace, Hannah, and Sarah, she found another reason to keep going. The girls grew up surrounded by love, even though they had very little money. Clara taught them that expensive things were not what made people valuable. She taught them to say thank you. She taught them to share. She taught them that a person could be rich in kindness even when their bank account was almost empty. Meanwhile, Marcus became more successful. His company expanded from Ohio into several other states. Newspapers called him one of the youngest rising real estate executives in the Midwest. He bought a mansion outside Cincinnati, drove expensive cars, and attended charity galas surrounded by influential people. Then he met Victoria Lawson. Victoria came from a wealthy family and moved comfortably through Marcus's new world. She wore elegant dresses, knew the right people, and understood how to make Marcus feel important. Within months, they were engaged. Their wedding was planned at an historic estate outside Cincinnati, one of the most expensive venues in the region. Marcus invited hundreds of people. And then, 3 weeks before the wedding, he sent Clara an invitation. It was beautifully printed on thick ivory paper. But Clara knew immediately that something was wrong. Marcus had not invited her because he wanted her there. He wanted an audience. He wanted Clara to appear at his wedding in the inexpensive clothes she still wore, standing among wealthy guests, so everyone could see how far she had fallen. He wanted Victoria to feel superior. He wanted his friends to laugh behind their hands. Most of all, he wanted Clara to remember that he had won. Clara almost threw the invitation away, but something inside her changed. She had spent 3 years allowing Marcus's cruelty to define how she saw herself. She had believed that being poor meant she had failed. Then she looked at her 3 daughters playing on the living room floor. Grace was drawing a picture. Hannah was trying to braid Sarah's hair. Sarah was laughing so hard she could barely sit still. Clara realized something that night. Marcus had taken the house. He had taken the money. He had taken her confidence. But he had never taken her children. And he had never taken her ability to rebuild. What Marcus didn't know was that during the previous 2 years, Clara had quietly built something of her own. One of the small businesses she had done bookkeeping for belonged to a retired entrepreneur named Arthur Caldwell. Arthur had noticed Clara's intelligence and determination. Instead of treating her like an employee, he had mentored her. Eventually, Clara began helping other struggling small businesses organize their finances. Her reputation grew. One client recommended another, then another. Clara's little home office became a legitimate consulting company. She didn't become wealthy overnight. She worked late. She studied. She made mistakes. She cried. She kept going. And eventually, her company secured a major contract with a national nonprofit organization. That contract changed everything. Clara still lived modestly, but she had become financially independent. Arthur, who had watched her journey from the beginning, never forgot the woman who had once worked at a kitchen table while 3 babies slept in the next room. And on the morning of Marcus's wedding, Arthur sent Clara a message. He told her that if she wanted to attend, his driver would take her. Clara hesitated. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want Marcus to suffer. She simply wanted to walk into that wedding without shame. So she accepted. At the estate, guests were already gathering. Victoria stood near the entrance in a breathtaking white gown, surrounded by friends and relatives. Marcus was wearing a white tuxedo and smiling confidently. Then someone mentioned that Clara had actually accepted the invitation. Marcus laughed. He told them it would be entertaining. He expected her to arrive in an old car. He imagined her stepping out alone, wearing a cheap dress, carrying the embarrassment of a failed marriage on her shoulders. Instead, at precisely 3 o'clock, a long black limousine rolled through the estate gates. Conversation stopped. The driver opened the door. Clara stepped out. She wasn't wearing diamonds. She wasn't covered in luxury. She didn't need to be. Her emerald green dress was elegant but simple. Her hair was carefully styled, and her expression was calm. Then the 3 little girls stepped out. They wore matching yellow dresses with green ribbons around their waists. They were beautiful, and they looked so much like Marcus that several guests immediately recognized the family resemblance. Marcus froze. Victoria's smile disappeared. Clara held the girls' hands and slowly walked toward the entrance. The crowd parted. For the first time in years, Marcus couldn't find a single word. Clara didn't look angry. That made it worse. She looked peaceful. Marcus suddenly noticed the 3 girls staring at him. They knew who he was. Their father. But they didn't know why he had chosen not to be part of their lives. Grace held Clara's hand tighter. Marcus's expression changed. For years, he had convinced himself that leaving Clara had been the best decision of his life. Now, standing face to face with the family he had abandoned, he finally understood what his decision had cost him. The wedding ceremony continued, but the atmosphere had changed. Marcus couldn't stop looking toward Clara. She sat quietly with her daughters. She didn't whisper. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't try to ruin anything. She simply watched. After the ceremony, Marcus finally approached her. He looked at the girls, then at Clara. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then he saw something that broke through the walls of pride he had built around himself. Sarah was holding a small photograph. It was an old picture of the four of them from the hospital. Clara had kept it all these years. Marcus stared at the photograph. He remembered that day. He remembered holding one of the babies for less than 5 minutes before leaving. Suddenly, the wealth, the mansion, the business, and the wedding seemed strangely meaningless. He realized Clara hadn't come to show him that she was richer. She had come to show herself that she was no longer afraid of him. Victoria eventually learned the truth about why Marcus had invited his former wife. She was horrified. She had believed Marcus was simply inviting Clara out of courtesy. When she realized he had planned to humiliate the mother of his own children, she walked away from him. The wedding that Marcus had designed to prove his success became the day everyone discovered his greatest failure. But Clara didn't celebrate his downfall. She didn't insult him. She simply gathered her daughters and left. The limousine carried them back through the Cincinnati streets as the girls laughed in the back seat. Clara looked out the window. For the first time in years, she felt free. Months passed. Marcus lost Victoria. His reputation suffered. But the greatest punishment wasn't losing money or status. It was realizing that he had missed the childhood of 3 incredible daughters. He eventually began trying to repair the relationship, not by buying gifts, but by showing up. Clara didn't make it easy. She didn't trust him immediately. She made him prove that his apology wasn't temporary. Marcus began attending the girls' school events. He learned their favorite books. He showed up for birthdays. He sat through dance recitals. He listened. Slowly, the girls began allowing him into their lives. One afternoon, years after the wedding, Marcus stood outside Clara's home holding 3 handmade birthday cards. The girls ran toward him. Clara watched from the doorway. She didn't forget the pain. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending the past had never happened. It meant refusing to let the past control the future. Marcus had once invited Clara to his wedding because he wanted the world to see her as a poor, broken woman. Instead, she arrived surrounded by the 3 people who had made her stronger. She didn't need the limousine to prove her worth. The limousine was simply a symbol of how far she had traveled. Her real victory was standing there without hatred in her heart. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't becoming richer than the person who hurt you. Sometimes it's becoming so strong, so peaceful, and so full of love that the person who tried to destroy you no longer has the power to define you. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that difficult seasons don't last forever, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about hope, family, forgiveness, and second chances. And before you leave, I have one special request. Comment, "Love is stronger," if you believe that kindness, forgiveness, and a mother's love can overcome even the deepest pain. Clara never forgot the night she stood outside her old home with 3 babies and nothing but a suitcase. But she also never forgot what happened afterward. She learned that losing everything can sometimes be the beginning of finding yourself. And years later, when her daughters asked her what the most valuable thing she had ever owned was, Clara didn't mention the company, the money, the beautiful home, or even the limousine. She simply looked at her 3 daughters, smiled through tears, and said that the greatest blessing in her life had been the 3 little hands that held hers when she had nothing. Because when the world looked at Clara and saw a poor, abandoned ex-wife, her daughters looked at her and saw their entire world. And sometimes, that is all the wealth a heart ever needs.